Four teams advanced to the NFC and AFC championship games, respectively. That means there's four teams that were eliminated during the divisional round. How do the Cowboys, Bills, Giants, and Jaguars get back to and potentially get over the hump in the 2023 season and beyond? Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
To the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thank you all so much for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of P&W is presented by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM, managing your football franchise from top to bottom all season long, all off season long, well, this is the game that is definitely for you. Download the game. Just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost in-game with promo code LOCKEDON Ultimate Football GM. Okay. This is always the age-old question, Matt. When your team falls a little bit short, do you stay the course? Do you drastically change things? And I think for all four of these teams, their paths were different and their paths going forward are a little bit different. So as it pertains to the Cowboys and the Bills and the Giants and Jaguars, who are all sitting at home, all of their fans are at home, sort of stewing in big playoff losses, which is always tough for the fan base. Let's see if we can give them a little bit of hope going into next season, and maybe start with the Dallas Cowboys, which have some big name decisions to be made, I think more so than the others.
Yeah, they do. And I'm a Dak believer. I don't know if we've talked enough Dak on here because he led the league in interceptions and he threw some bad picks in this game, and that's why they lost. And was it his best year? No, but I still think he's a tier 2 quarterback. I don't think he's Mahomes and Burrow and those guys. I think he's the 8th best quarterback in the league or something along those lines. I've heard things like, boy, that was a bad contract. Never going to win with this guy. He's Kirk Cousins. I don't believe that at all. I do think that he is an aggressive player and isn't going to lead the league in, the smallest amount of turnovers. But he also needs to elevate those around him because I'm looking at this chart that Pro Football Focus put out in terms of cap space versus draft space, draft resources. And most of these teams are going to be low. I mean, the Cowboys are below average in cap space. They're well below average. They're below average in draft picks that they have at their disposal. Pollard's a free agent. I think job number one for this team is give me another weapon. I think the league is trending that way anyways. Gallup maybe is a better player this year than he was this past year. I think you have to move on from Zeke in some way, shape, or form. That's the bad contract, not Dak being the bad contract. I mean, what you always say about paying backs is killing the Cowboys. It's not paying your quarterback. So I think you have to somehow retain Pollard, and maybe that's even a franchise tag. Tell Zeke, hey, you'll be in our Ring of Honor someday, but that ship has sailed. And maybe even find one more pass catcher of some sort because Dalton Schultz is up as well, which doesn't sound like much, but you're losing more than you're gaining on offense.
There's a lot there, and I have big thoughts. Yeah. And there's one idea that actually I think spreads to all four of these teams, and really all 8 of these teams. When you look at the teams that advanced to the championship round and the teams that were eliminated in the divisional round, but you nailed it. Zeke and Dak; those are the big decisions first. You start there, then you worry about players that aren't on your roster. And as far as Zeke Elliott goes, they can get out of the contract, they can gain cap space. I mean, that one seems like it's pretty darn easy and self-explanatory here.
Agreed.
If they cut, there's some dead money involved, but they would still save, $5 million, even though $12 million is dead money with gosh, don't sign running backs to those big second contracts. It's funny because I keep getting into this conversation. because people are mad at me because I wasn't sure about the Christian McCaffrey trade for the 49ers. And I'm like, man, well, look at Zeke, look at Leonard Fournette, who was in the same draft class, who's running around like he's 40 and weighing 260 pounds. You look at
he's gonna get cut this year too.
You look at I don't know. You look at all.
There's tons of them. There really are.
It never works out. And Chris McCaffrey clearly is a different beast, and you shouldn't expect that. So don't go into it because Christian McCaffrey worked out and say, "Oh, this is the smart thing to do is spend resources on running back." It's just still not. And guys like Zeke remind you of that. And he's gaining 2 yards per carry. And even when Pollard leaves the game, Zeke Elliott's running up the middle like it's a short yardage situation. It's like you're not short yardage back anymore. You're the main back because Pollard's out.
Yeah.
So clearly they have to do whatever they can do. And really maybe the Pollard injury helps the Cowboys because that might limit how many teams are going to be
maybe
trying to spend a bunch of money on him if he's not able to pass a physical right away when free agency opens. And we'll see what that high ankle sprain it was a broken bone. Right?
I think it's a broken bone.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so he won't be able to work out for teams and pass a physical yet. So that might make it that much easier. And I think it's a no-brainer for the Cowboys to bring Pollard back and let and cut Zeke Elliott because you're not going to find someone to take on that contract. And so cut Zeke pre-June 1st. It would be $12 million in dead money. They would still gain about $5 million. If they go post June 1st, that spreads that cap hit out over 2 years. So now they're only having about $6 million in dead money, and they would gain about $12 million in cap. So post June 1st designation cut is probably the most likely thing. I think it's really the only path for Zeke Elliott.
So a couple notes is I think when it's all said and done, when we talk about these 4 teams, this is the one that I would stay the course the most with. I don't see wholesale changes. I don't see resources to make wholesale changes. I don't see coaching changes. I think you basically run it back and tweak it. And then the last Zeke note, you're talking about how he runs just up the middle like it's 4th and 1 every time. When they would try to get him to the edge and do Pollard things with him after the injury, especially against that Niners speed, it looked like me and you trying to get to the edge. Like that ain't going to cut it anymore.
Yeah, and the famous play is the last play where Niners linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair just crushed him after he snapped the ball. Like that's going to be the last thing ever. It was the last play of Zeke Elliott probably in a Cowboys uniform. Unfortunately, because he had a lot of great.
He's been a great player. Yeah,
he had a lot of great times earlier on in his career. Real quick, going back to Dak, just the cap stuff here. Would you consider trading him if a team calls and says, "Hey, we love Zach, let's trade for him"? Because he's got a crazy huge contract, but it's structured in a way that you would take a massive hit. If he was traded, it would be like almost $60 million in dead money, but his cap number is like $50 million. So you're really only, minus $10 million if you traded him. And then if it was post June 1st, again, like we talked about before, trading him post June 1st, all the guarantees, obviously a new team picks up if it's a trade situation. They're not going to cut Dak Prescott, and they probably wouldn't trade him either. I think you're right. You keep Dak and you keep going. But if you traded Dak post June 1st, it would only be about $18 million in dead money this year, spreading that dead money over a couple of years, and you would gain $31 million in cap space this year. So contract wise, trading Dak in a post June 1st situation is really doable if they decide that's something they want to do. Now, they would have already had to figure out what another quarterback would be, right, for them?
Right.
At that point, because that's after the draft. But it's possible now, even though Dak signed that really big contract recently.
I strongly lean towards no, because I think I can write a story where this version of the Cowboys wins the Super Bowl next year or is a contender again, is a Final Four type of team, a Final Six type of team. So I strongly lean towards no. But if you don't think you can get there with this group and you can turn him into a plethora of draft picks and maybe you end up with CJ Stroud as your quarterback or something like that to get to, again, as you said, who's your quarterback then? Is it a rookie or is it Jimmy and you're just going to be 8-8? I'm not cool with that.
Cooper Rush, Matt.
Cooper Rush. But we can't forget either that this team's different. Like, I think they need Staubach, Aikman, Romo, Dak. Everything's bigger in Texas. I don't think they want Jimmy G or Gardner Minshew. You know what I mean?
If you look at this from another team's angle, and they'd be trading for Dak and getting the last 2 years, because it's a 6-year deal, but 2 of them were void years because they threw big salary. That's why there's so much dead money, and there was guarantees there, and there's a new let's see, all the guarantees end this year basically. But Dak, for the last 2 years that a team would be trading for, they would not be picking up the bonus money, right? So they would just be paying him 31 million and 29 million. So an average of 30 million a year for Dak Prescott. That's not bad compared to what's going on. Yeah, so I think teams
Burrow's going to make 50.
Right. So teams might call on Dak. And then when you look at this from the Cowboys' perspective, all that dead money just to move on from Dak, and when you believed in him that much, probably doesn't make a lot of sense, which leads me to our next topic here. And it's a Cowboys topic right now, but I think it pertains to most of the other teams on the list. And the number one thing I think almost all four of these teams really need to focus on this offseason, including the Cowboys, who should stick with Dak, in my opinion, next. Today's episode brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. You've heard us talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun we had competing against our fellow Locked On NFL host, Chris Carter, who Matt knows well. He's the host of Locked On Steelers, was our Locked On NFL champion. He came in first place in our in our little competition there. And now it's your turn to compete. But more on that later. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your own football franchise? That dream can come true with this game, and you'll manage every aspect of your franchise through seasons trying to build your dynasty. You are controlling naming rights of your stadium, but really the stuff on the field is the fun stuff. Hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through free agency, of course, the NFL draft, and all the ups and downs of a season, all in a challenging and realistic game world. And Locked On listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise in-game when using promo code Locked On. That's one word, all caps, Locked On in the game. So make sure you check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com, Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed up to the Locked On NFL YouTube channel. Make sure you're checking out the podcast for your specific team, which is covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network every single day. And the Locked On NFL channel with NFL key predictions, game-to-game episodes every Monday from local insiders. Of course, Peacock and Williamson right now is on the Locked On NFL channel as well. More news on that potentially later. And, of course, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We do have some news about the Peacock and Williamson YouTube channel, by the way, coming up on another date. But
maybe tomorrow will tell you about that.
I'm seeing the numbers, man. The NFL's crazy, and NFL fans, I guess, got to appreciate everybody seeing the numbers growing into January. And there's no off season with our podcast, and we love to be honest with you, Matt, especially with this show. I love chopping it up about off-season stuff.
Oh, me too. Yeah,
an episode like this is fun. And look, next week we have an extra week. We got Senior Bowl in between the NFC champion and the AFC championships and the Super Bowl. So lots of fun conversations all off-season long. So you can tune into us every single day, all year long.
And then when your Niners lose, we can do a big recap like this for them too.
I can't wait for that one. Hopefully that's in February. So,
all right, who are we talking about next year? Or you got an overriding theme,
This is the Dallas Cowboys thing for sure. When you look at this football team and you watch the 49ers Cowboys game, and then you watched all the other games from divisional round weekend, we're talking about the New York Giants losing to the Philadelphia Eagles, right? We're talking about the Cincinnati Bengals beating the Buffalo Bills. And of course, and I think maybe less so Chiefs Jaguars. That was a different situation. Mm-hmm. But I think the other three teams for sure. Look at the teams that are still in it. Cincinnati Bengals, Jamar Chase, Mixon, Higgins, Boyd, right? You look at the 49ers, Debo, Ayuk, Christian McCaffrey, Elijah Mitchell, George Kittle. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles, A.J. Brown and Goddard and Devontae Smith. And you're starting to see what is really happening in the NFL is not only are quarterbacks important, but the weapons they have are also really important. And you look at the teams that lost, the Cowboys, it was like, okay, CeeDee Lamb, 10 catches for 100 yards. Who cares? That's not enough. There was nothing else happening to beat the 49ers. You look at, and we talked about this before the game even happened with the Bills and the Bengals, Josh Allen throwing to Stephon Diggs. and not really anything else. No running game, no dynamic players making plays for that football team. And there's tons on the other side of the field. And of course, none more stark than the Philadelphia Eagles and their playmakers on offense versus the playmakers on offense for the New York Giants. It's almost miraculous that the Giants got as far as they did with their lack of playmakers on that side of the ball, Saquon Barkley, and that's about it. So I think the overriding thing for all these teams is receivers, ball carriers, like dynamic playmakers on offense, add weapons to make your quarterback better. And I think for the Cowboys, that's the most obvious. And Dak's going to be so much better next year. He's probably going to, come down to the mean a little bit as far as throwing fewer interceptions. He's going to have to do less because he's going to have more playmakers. And so you got to re-sign Pollard and you got to flip, a plodding running back into a dynamic receiving weapon. And so I think that's probably the number one thing on the list for at least 3 out of 4 of these teams, and maybe even all of them when you consider the Jaguars as well, who kind of did that already last year and it helped them out. And they have Ridley coming back, and you hope that that's something. They got to re-sign, Evan Ingram. So add playmakers, all 4 of those teams is probably number one on the list for every single one.
I think the league's really going that way. And, it's easy to say Urban Meyer's out. That's why Jacksonville's so much better. Big coaching upgrade. Well, they're also not throwing to Laquan Treadwell anymore. I mean, the guys that Lawrence were throwing to last year should not be on the field. And it's interesting to me because I'm feeling that way as well. I'm a purist. I want linemen. I want to dominate the line of scrimmage. Receivers might be more important than linemen now. And
I wouldn't go that far. Let's calm down here. But it's the gap is closing. I think that's completely fair. And I also think it's not just having some guys, it's having the guy. I look at the Eagles versus the Titans. The Titans are well coached. They've got a great defense. They've got a star running back. They traded away AJ Brown, and that team is mediocre as heck.
Yeah.
With all of what they had going for them. And all of a sudden we saw what it did to the Philadelphia Eagles and saw them take off and make it to the next level. And that's sort of anecdotal and just one team and one idea. But when you look at the teams that are left, they all can kill you in multiple ways. A lot of it with the Chiefs is because of Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And they have like a group of playmakers, sort of almost a no-name group of playmakers there, but a lot of guys who can make plays. But the other teams have multiple stars that they can get the ball to and help out their quarterback.
Yep. So I got 2 nuggets on that. First of all, I was just so happens you were a little late today, by the way, on the invitation, pulling back the curtain. So I'm just kind of standing here waiting for my my link to get on there with you. And I'm listening to the Athletics podcast as I was waiting, and they were debating. It was Nate Tice and Bill Barnwell and Robert Mays, who's the host. And I liked what they said because they were kind of having a similar conversation. Tice said, a good O-line gives you a high floor as an offense. Great receivers give you a high ceiling. I think that's a good way of looking at it. Like if I have a really good O-line, I'm going to be an average to above average offense and be able to play it a certain way. But if I have great receivers, my ceiling is unbelievably high. And I tend to agree with that. I've been thinking about that, just the last 20 minutes or so. And so as you were talking about the great receiving weapons or weapons period that are left in the dance, I pulled up my handy dandy spreadsheet, my playoff rank grid that I wrote and that got a lot of attention and a lot of scrutiny. And receiving weapons, number 1, San Fran. Number 4, Philly. Number 2, Cincy, all still alive. KC I had at 10 because I feel like it's Kelsey and everybody else. Right. But when you have Superman as your quarterback, you can get away with that.
And and it's still a pretty dynamic thing. If you compare, right. I would take, Mahomes, Kelsey, and the group of playmakers that the Chiefs have over Cowboys, Giants, Bills, and who else? I already forgot who the other team we're talking about here. Jaguars? Yeah. It's still better than all those 4.
Right.
In my opinion. Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's a lot to be said to that. And we planned on talking about 4 teams, but I do think that is a great theme of the offseason is I want one more weapon. I'm starting to get really greedy with weapons. Like, is slot receiver the biggest need for this team? No, but this slot receiver in the draft can really run. Give me him anyway,
And I would say, yeah, you need a lot of playmakers, but also the value of that dude, that number 1 guy. It's like, I don't think it's enough anymore to say, we got a number one and then we got a couple other guys. It's like, okay, well, let's get another number one. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
They bracket him. Okay, have fun over here on this side. And I think that's that's one of the things that's unlocked the 49ers offense when you bring in someone like Christian McCaffrey. And it's just a nice fit for Kyle Shanahan, right? But when you consider how much they used to be able to focus on Debo, and now they can't. And so now you have to play them a little bit straight up. And you think about the Eagles. It's like, okay, well, we'll worry about this guy and this guy. And now it's like, well, now there's A.J. Brown over here. So one of those guys is going to be open and have a one-on-one matchup. And so and
the Eagles are a little different because, like, I just lump their whole run game together because Hurts, I don't care who the ball carrier is, it's often Hurts. But, boy, I have to dedicate so many resources defensively to this great run game. But how do I guard Goddard, Smith, and Brown now? I mean, when it was just Goddard and Smith, that was feasible. Now it's a third guy. I can't do all that.
No, if you got 8 in the box and you're spying Jalen Hurts, you just don't have guys in coverage for those guys.
Right. This is just math.
You still got to build the lines, though. So what we're learning is you got to be good everywhere. So you got to skimp somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Where is that? Like, you just don't pay safeties, don't pay.
It's funny because I just wrote an article yesterday for the local website I write for here, DK Pittsburgh Sports. And the whole crux of it was, what can the Steelers learn from these 4 teams? And in the end, I didn't have a conclusion, like this is the blueprint to get to the Final Four. But I do think any negatives get exposed. Yeah, I mean, playoff football, if you have a weakness, a glaring weakness, they're going to find it. Maybe you win a game or two, but at some point it's going to show up. And that doesn't mean you can't win the Super Bowl without a weakness, but you better not have a crippling weakness, which almost every team does.
More on the specifics of, we've already talked Cowboys, more on the specifics, though, of the Bills and the Giants and the Jaguars next. Really excited about our latest sponsor here on the Locked On Podcast Network because they are the number one sports book in America. That's right. FanDuel is now the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you're new to FanDuel, that's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. New customers join today and get started with $150 in free bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel has all your favorite bets from money line to point spreads. And of course, now when we reference all of our point spreads here on the podcast, which we will do when we make our picks this week, it will be the lines we find at FanDuel.com. And you can sign up at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Player props. There's a parlay builder, which is always super fun. Same game parlays as well, trying to get that bigger payout. So football fans, don't miss out. Place your first $5 bet and get $150 in free bets, win or lose, at FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sponsor of Sportsbooks, partner of the NFL, and now of the Locked On Podcast Network as well. I'm geeked out about FanDuel. I'm getting geeked out about these NFC and AFC championship games as well. So we'll be covering those. We got James Rapine of Locked On Bengals talking with us on tomorrow's podcast. But about those eliminated teams, Matt. So looking specifically,
I don't know if we can get to all these now. I mean, we just kind of went off on a tangent. Maybe we'll stick to the NFC. Right?
We nailed the biggest aspect of all of them, I think. I think the Jaguars is easy, not to put them aside, but for the Jaguars, it's like, look, re-sign Evan Ingram. We just talked about needing weapons for your young quarterback, and you're just, adding the best players you can. Just continue building that thing. They're on the right track there. And so I think that one's more organic with the team that's good, and they could build themselves into something great. Keep drafting the best players, keep adding playmakers on both sides of the ball, adding linemen, offensive line, make year 3 even better. Let's see the growth for Trevor Lawrence into year 3 with even more around him.
I 100% agree, but not everyone out there might realize, despite having a rookie quarterback and a young upstart team, they're up against it cap-wise. I mean, they have a lot of bigger contracts on that team because they had to overpay free agents to come there before. So they don't have as much flexibility as people think. And oh, by the way, they're not picking first overall again either. When you go to the playoffs, you don't get as much draft capital.
I think they do have some mechanics in some of those contracts. And look,
Mhm.
Christian Kirk's not going to see the end of his contract. You know what I mean? It's one of those
Zay
things.
Jones
So
isn't,
they might
but
need
yeah.
to keep drafting and developing wide receivers to eventually replace those guys, because the ones they overpaid are not going to see the end of their contracts, and they're going to get some money by restructuring and cutting some of those guys later. So I think there are some mechanics doing that as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, and they've had
They
to
used to just
overpay
have a
off.
blank checkbook though and do anything they
Right,
want, and now
right,
they
right.
don't.
So
Yeah.
now they have to get some cost controlled talent
Yeah.
around Trevor Lawrence. New York Giants here. Clearly, Saquon
They're
Barkley.
different than everybody else.
This one's harder, to be honest with you, because I just
Yes.
talked about how you don't go crazy paying running backs. Saquon was great this year, but man, I mean, the wheels are going to fall off if you sign him to some huge deal. But here's your entire offense. You got to re-sign him. So that one's tough for me, because they're going to give him a contract that I guess he just got to, and he wants to be paid at the most that anybody's paid in the NFL at running back, and that's usually a bad contract. But if you want to compete, you kind of have to do it. And the Giants are backed into the corner because they have no other way to score on offense right now, and they still need to add more with Saquon Barkley.
They are tough because they outkicked their coverage. You know, I mean, they didn't think they would get this far, in my opinion. This was a rebuild year. This was a tear it down year. This is get your cap in place type of year. And wow, we end up going to the playoffs and winning more games than we thought. But they got the Barkley situation and the Daniel Jones situation. And I know Dak and Daniel Jones ended on bad notes, as most quarterbacks do. Only one gets to hoist the trophy. But I think you have to run it back with Daniel Jones. You're not picking in the top 8 or anything like that. I mean, I think you have to try to get a 2-year deal done with him or something along those lines. Probably more than he's worth. He'll probably get 30, and people will be like, $30 million for Daniel Jones. That's kind of all you got. And if you can get that done, then I'm franchising Barkley. I don't want to give him a 3 or 4 year deal. I would love to have him on a 1-year deal. And if I franchise him, maybe someone comes calling and say, we'll give you a first round pick for him. And then I'm talking about that. And then
you get worse. That's the only thing
I know.
Is you kind of getting worse before you get better. I would probably go
this
the
team
opposite.
Might get worse anyway.
Well, I think they might just kind of, there was some luck involved, and obviously they did a great job there. To be honest with you, I think Daniel Jones had 0% to do with their success, and I wouldn't pay anything close to what he's asked for as a free agent. So I would kind of do it opposite. Make sure you're good in the short term. Make sure Saquon, you pay him, but also you can get out of it in 2 years. You know, so it's more about structure with Saquon, because he's probably not going to show up anyway if you try to franchise tag him, like with a running back too. So do what you can with him. Try to make it look good, but a deal that you can get out of if the wheels do fall off. And they just do with running backs. Although he's really good in the passing game, and that might be the saving grace for a running back to last a little longer, last a couple years longer, which we've seen. That's the difference between Christian McCaffrey and who else. And actually, Zeke was a good receiver too. It's just.
But not McCaffrey level,
Right, exactly.
Weapon level.
Saquon's probably the one guy who, Saquon and Christian McCaffrey are just kind of different dudes, as far as, and you still see that athleticism in Saquon. So you haven't seen any clues to the breakdown, but that's usually one of the things that kills you. But as long as you can get out of that in a couple of years, I wouldn't have said that they should have re-signed. I thought they should have traded Saquon Barkley last offseason, to be honest with you, and helped their rebuild. But he was so good for them. So re-sign Saquon. Make sure you can get out of that deal in a couple of years, and I think you're going quarterback hunting. And they've got a ton of cap space, so they can do what they need to do.
Space, yeah.
How about, look, Brian Daboll clearly has no problem running the ball with his quarterback. What about Lamar Jackson with the New York Giants? They can afford to pay him.
They could afford to pay him. They could probably get a nice compensation package. They have some important pieces in place. Andrew Thomas, Dexter Lawrence, Thibodeau, expensive positions. I don't know. I don't love that one as some as the other fits, just because I think you go from a 7 or 8 win team to a 9 or 10 win team. I don't think that makes you a contender. I think there's too much other stuff.
I think going from Daniel Jones to Lamar Jackson is the quickest way to add that playmaker to your offense and be better instantly. Throw one receiver in there, one.
And they get like Wan'Dale Robinson back and Sterling Shepard. Yes. I mean, like no position group in the league gets hurt more than Giants receivers. They'll move on from Kenny Golladay, I'm sure.
But clearly it's the offensive side of the ball, right? Whether it's Daniel Jones or not, to me, I think you move on from Daniel Jones because he's not a big enough part of it. And whatever you would have to pay him just doesn't make sense. $30 million a year, you could go get whatever you want. And I'd rather just roll with a rookie quarterback or go trade for another quarterback. So that's what I would be looking at is something dynamic needs to be added. Multiple dynamic pieces need to be added. Hopefully, Wan'Dale Robinson, some of those guys are already that for the New York Giants going into next year.
And there's an argument out there that if they rolled with Tyrod Taylor, their backup, the whole year, would the season been a lot different? Maybe not. I mean, I can see both sides of that. I'd rather have Daniel Jones and Tyrod Taylor, but you could roll it back with him, trade for Trey Lance, use a second-round pick on a quarterback, try to cheap it out, while you're building the infrastructure a little bit, something like that. Quick defensive note, though. Like, I love their defensive front. But Leonard Williams is a good player. He's not a tremendous player. He's like a $35 million cap hit. Like, he's getting cut. And their back seven isn't very good.
Yeah, there's a lot of work.
They need a lot.
This is a tough roster. This is a tough roster to make great. But as long as they're able to somewhat do what they did this year and they can add a little more on offense, it makes them a better team on paper. I don't know if the results will be better next year.
But if we did this thing if we did this 1 year ago when the Giants were eliminated, we would say this is probably a 3-year rebuild. Probably still is.
Yes. Yeah. To get where they want it to be.
Yeah. I mean, it still probably is 2 more years. Right.
The Buffalo Bills is the last team. Clearly, this
they worry
team
me.
Playmakers. We've talked about that. Beyond the playmaker thing, because there needs to be a Robin to Diggs Batman, and there's some good players there, but I would be looking around, and maybe the Bills can't find that player. Maybe that guy's not available this offseason. Whether it's the draft, you're trying to develop a guy, whatever. And I think they kind of try to do that a little bit with Cooks last year. Last year in the draft, and maybe he helps them a little bit. But to me, one playmaker for sure needs to be added, but they've got to fix the offensive line. And I think they've got to find some dynamism on the defensive line, or just hope that Von Miller comes back and is that guy, because there's more work here to this Bills team that we thought was a juggernaut coming into the year that started to really show some holes at the end of the season and eventually with their exit.
Yeah. This team worries me. I'm not saying their window's shut. It didn't, but this was the year they went all in. That was the Von Miller move. They pushed their chips into the middle and they got eliminated. They didn't have the best hand at the poker table. And this chart I'm looking at, only the Saints and Dolphins have less offseason resources than the Bills. And they have guys like Edmonds, Poyer, several others hitting free agency that are important players for them. And I'm with you. I think their biggest need is one more weapon. Maybe they push their chips in again and trade for DeAndre Hopkins, put him opposite Diggs or something like that, or their first round pick's a receiver at a minimum. That being said, I thought this was obvious when they played the Bengals this past week. They kind of could use, and this is going to sound so 80s of me, Jerome Bettis and Vince Wilfork. You play in Buffalo, you can't, they're built like a dome team. You need a back that can close teams out. You need a power guy. I mean, you need to stop the run, middle of the defensive line, eat up block, nose tackle type almost. They live in nickel and they get pushed around.
And luckily for the Bills, those are some of the easiest things you can find in this.
You can get that. Yeah.
So they should be able to get that. And those are some band-aid things. And if money's the crunch, I don't think you're re-signing Tremaine Edmonds for what he would command. He's not a good enough coverage player in this day and age in the NFL. Linebackers, I think, is something you can find unless they are just ridiculous in coverage and a do-it-all 3-down sort of a player. And Tremaine Edmonds, you thought would be that. He's just not quite at that elite level of player, even though he's still only 25 years old, which is hard to believe. He was, I think, a redshirt sophomore, right, when he came out in the draft. It's ridiculous.
Side note: the Steelers are going to sign both the Edmonds brothers, by the way, to a group deal.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
They're both free agents. They're going to both come here. It's kind of what they do. Haywards, Watts, Edmonds. All the brothers.
That's a great fit, and I know that
it's perfect.
Steelers defense is kind of not quite what it used to be as far as scheme wise. I think of the old 3-4 Greg Lloyd Steelers defenses, right? But I always thought Tremaine Edmonds with his size would be someone that you can move around and rush more off the edge, and and be more of a almost like a Micah Parsons type of a player where you could play a lot of different positions, and rather than just a straight up inside backer off ball at 6'4".
Yeah. But their defense is going to lose more than it gains. Like, I would much rather resign Poyer if I had my choice between the two of them. But you got to find somebody for Edmonds. Like I said, they always play nickel. They have two linebackers on the field like every snap. Well, they need to find another one now. I mean, and the O-line could use some work, and they need a power back and another receiver. And Josh Allen's making $8 million bazillion. And, all of a sudden the Bills are coming due, they're due.
Right. And you start to see why it's so easy for teams that have quarterbacks on rookie contracts to build the rest of the roster versus those teams that have already paid their quarterbacks. Yeah. And we saw last year it was the Kansas City Chiefs losing dollars from their roster, basically, because you got to start paying Patrick Mahomes, and it was Tyreek Hill that left. And luckily they were able to overcome that. Can the Bills overcome that? And they might have to be a lot more frugal with their shopping and the pieces that they build around Josh Allen, but clearly they have some holes. And I think it's both lines, and I think it's playmakers. I think those are the two biggest keys there.
And we'll wrap this up, but either next week or 3 weeks from now, we're going to have this discussion about the Bengals. Well, can you maintain it? Maybe they win the Super Bowl this year. Great chance of doing so. But when Burrow's making $50 million, you're not going to have Chase and Higgins and anything.
One of them's gone for sure.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, that's when all the bills get paid. It's
going to be fascinating. The cap's going up the next 2 years, though. So
of course.
Will these teams be able to pull it off? We've seen teams like the Rams and I think we're going to see a lot more. We're going to see a lot more draft picks traded. We're going to see teams going for it. And so maybe that's the way that some of these teams say, you know what, we'll worry about those bills later. The cap is going up. We're going to spend what we have to now. We're going to restructure what we have to now. We don't care about the rookies in the draft. We're going to trade those first round picks for players that can help us now. And I have a feeling some teams are going to see that and be like, well, that's the blueprint. We got to compete. And we're going to do what teams like the Rams and the Eagles have done in the past and start moving some of those draft picks for players that we know can help us win, because we got to get over that hump, especially for the Bills. The Bills are due to go get that title. And so huge offseason for them. I think they're going to be aggressive.
It's amazing. The Bills were one of the best 5 or 6 teams in the league, lasted up until late January, but it's a disappointing year.
It's a disappointing year, right? And I think for the Cowboys too, the Cowboys and Bills are in that, okay, we're going to go aggressive this offseason mode. Whereas the Jaguars and the Giants that we talked about are like,
they're slow playing it.
Let's build this thing, right? Let's build this. So 2 very different ideas with those 4 teams.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks everybody for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. We are getting into championship week Sunday conversations. It will be James Rapine of Locked On Bengals joining us tomorrow. And of course, Friday, we will make our picks for both the AFC and NFC championship. Make sure you are tuned in to Peacock and Williamson. We'll talk to you then.